Advance or die. That is the command being delivered to Russia's soldiers by commanders who are desperate to impress the Kremlin, even as the country's army implodes. Putin has lost the war that he started as something is devouring Russia's military. And here's the kicker. It's Russia that is responsible for the sacrifice of almost 1.3 million soldiers and counting. Putin is desperate. The sacrifice didn't help, and now he's doing something that will cripple his entire country just so he can continue fighting a lost war. There is immense pressure inside Russia's military. And that pressure can be seen in the words of a Russian commander said during a call that Ukraine's military intelligence, or HUR, intercepted and published on February 15th. What do you mean there's plus there? What the are you doing? Have you completely lost your minds? Russian commander bellows at his troops. What the you mean refusal? Move forward, go. What we see here are two very interesting things. First, the word refusal. It's clear at this point that more and more of Russia's soldiers are refusing to charge headlong into the Ukrainian kill zones that they know will destroy them. And you'll learn why they're so terrified of those zones in just a few minutes. But the second thing is even more revealing. It's clear that this commander isn't listening to what the soldiers are telling him. There is no attempt to adjust, no tactical withdrawal that would allow the Russian assault team to adapt to what they see and maybe start a new attack that increases their odds of survival. Russia only wants to push forward. It apparently has no other strategy than sending its soldiers into the meat grinder, and the desperation that results from losing so many men is what has lost Russia the war. That desperation bleeds down to commanders who are in fear of the higher-ups to whom they report. Faster! I need to file the report, the commander screams in the intercepted call. That isn't leadership. It's pencil pushing with people's lives. To the commander, it doesn't matter how many soldiers he leads into the kill zones. What matters is that the soldiers push forward, only by a couple of feet, so that he can go back to his superiors and report on a job so well done that Russia lost everybody in the assault. Again. As HUR says on Telegram, the interception of this call showcases evidence of the extremely low morale and psychological state of Russian units. Putin's soldiers don't want to fight. They're being forced into assaults by commanders who are more concerned with accolades and reports than they are with their soldiers. What this amounts to is a Russian military filled with unmotivated soldiers whose morale is at rock bottom because they don't know what they're supposed to be fighting for. But those who say no get short shrift. You refusers, you donkeys, commander screams at his troops before delivering his final order. Now you'll go together with them and charge in there. Translation, go and die so I can tell Putin that we gained a couple of feet up to the spot where a drone blew you up. This is the reality of the war that Putin started, and it reveals exactly why Russia has already lost. Any semblance of strategy long ago went out the window, like so many politicians who have crossed Putin in the past. All that Russia has left is its meat assaults. The barbaric strategy of throwing cannon fodder into the kill zones in the hope that the next body will be the one that forces Ukraine to use up the last of its ammunition or drones. We see this strategy enshrined in Russia's Pokrovsk disaster. A city that was supposed to fall under the might of Russia's 2025 summer offensive is still partially controlled by Ukraine, meaning there has been more than half a year of brutal fighting that Putin believed would never happen. And as Colonel Vladimir Putin, who is the head of communications for the 7th Rapid Response Corps of Ukraine's air assault forces, said on February 7th, Russia is paying a heavy price for its meat assaults on Pokrovsk. Overall, on the Pokrovsk axis, the enemy is losing about 6,000 personnel per month. These are enormous numbers. That is effectively 2 full-strength brigades. The loss ratio is in our favor. The ratio of losses is roughly 1-6, Putin states, adding, but what is important is that the Russians are also losing in tempo. For every 1 killed, they have about 1.3 wounded. For every 100 killed, 130 wounded. That's a horrific ratio. Horrific is the perfect word to describe what Putin is doing in his own military. After all, as we said earlier in the video, something is devouring Russia's army, and it's not just Ukraine, though it is doing an excellent job of taking advantage of that certain something. It's pressure, a relentless call from the Kremlin for its army to advance, no matter the cost, is what has led to the sacrifice of well over 1 million Russian soldiers. And it's that pressure that has forced Putin into a corner that has led him to doing things that have cost Russia the war. We'll go deeper on that last point toward the end of the video. On the pressure front, we see it writ large all over the call that HUR intercepted. Perhaps, once upon a time, the commander who was using threats to force his soldiers forward might have cared about some of his men. Whatever compassion may have once existed is long gone, however, replaced by the brutalization of the Russian army that we see all across the front. Pressure is paying, but not in the way that Russia hoped. Putin thought that constant pressure on Ukraine's defenses would cripple his enemy. It has destroyed Russia's military instead. And we see that in the refusals we discussed earlier, and the evidence that is emerging that Russia is as quick to kill its own people be that deliberately or through rank incompetence. In a December 31st report, the New York Times said that Russia's army has developed an insatiable demand for men. The machine that Putin has created is underpinned by brutality and coercion, the outlet adds, which has led to Russia stooping so low that it sends even the gravely ill and injured back to the front lines to serve as meat for the Ukraine war grinder. Those left at home live in fear for the fates of their husbands and sons in Ukraine, which has led to complaints circulating throughout Russia. One of those petitions saw over 1,500 people inside Russia accuse the country's military of wrongdoing in the ranks that is hidden from the public. This wrongdoing is even worse than commanders screaming at soldiers to push forward when the commander knows they're leading the soldiers to their deaths. In an October report, the Moscow Times revealed that at least 100 Russian officers have executed their subordinates in Ukraine. In some cases, officers even demanded their soldiers' bank cards and PIN numbers, supposedly for delivery to their families in the motherland. But we all know what the officers really want. Soldiers' banks are filled with the fat payouts they get for signing up for Putin's war. A bank card and a PIN number are all that's needed to send that money into the pockets of corrupt officers who think nothing of the lives of their soldiers or the people they've left behind. That's not how a military should work. Pressure placed on the Russian military by Putin and his underlings is what has led to this brutal catastrophe. And so we come back to the commander and his orders. Just push forward, charge into the kill zones and die for your country. To understand the mass chaos this has created in the Russian ranks, we need to explain what a kill zone actually contains. United 24 Media provided a good roundup in an interactive piece that explains precisely what the pressure that Putin places on his army pushes his soldiers into facing. First, there is the terrain. Layers of defenses transform the ground itself into a death trap for the Russian soldiers who are inevitably ordered to march forward, usually without any vehicles. That is Putanka, which is the Ukrainian word that stands for a massive network of thin barbed wire that constantly catches clothing and feet, bogging the Russian soldiers down. Massive spools of barbed wire also have to be navigated, and there are often Ukrainian units hunkered down in tunnels, either waiting in ambush or controlling drones. We'll get to the drones in a second. Should Russia's troops be fortunate enough to have a tank or armoured vehicle, they still have to overcome mines, ditches and dragon's teeth, which, like the barbed wire for infantry, is designed to slow them down and, in the case of mines, blow their tracks off. And then there are the drones, hundreds of them. Some are conducting reconnaissance, leading Ukrainian ambushers to their prey. Others are FPV drones with explosive payloads which fly toward trapped tanks and isolated soldiers. Deaths are inevitable. Ukraine builds its kill zones so that it can use them to funnel Russian soldiers into ambushes by drones and artillery. For the vast majority who enter these wastelands of human misery, there will be no escape. They will die, and more will follow. As the National Interest put it in a January 25th article, these kill zones could well save Ukraine. However, that's in large part due to the pressure that we've talked about several times already. The kill zones wouldn't be as effective as they are if Putin himself weren't ordering the mass slaughter of his own soldiers by sending them in. There has been no effort on Russia's part to come up with alternative tactics that could subvert the kill zones. Russian commanders are told to gain territory, that's it. They'll be punished if they don't, which is what leads to situations like the one that the HUR captured in February. Pressure from the top equals deaths at the bottom. And what a sacrifice the Russian military has made for Putin's war. According to Minfin, 1,254,450 of Russia's soldiers have been killed, wounded, captured, or gone missing between when Putin launched his invasion and February 16th. Russia is currently losing soldiers at an average rate of about 1,000 per day, according to NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte. At that rate, it's going to take about 45 or 46 more days for Russia to hit 1.3 million soldiers sacrificed at the altar of a war that they have already lost. Putin is desperate to keep the meat grinder churning, so desperate that he's now doing something that will not only destroy his military, but will cripple Russia itself. We're about to expose what that is. But before we do, there's a lot more where this comes from. If you're getting value from the military show, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a video. So what is Putin doing that is going to take a lost war and turn it into a country-destroying calamity from which Russia may never recover? 3 words: secret mass mobilization. In an explosive February 13th report for The Telegraph, UK military expert Hamish de Bretton-Gordon revealed that Russia is running out of volunteers for Putin's lost cause. Recruiting prisoners isn't helping anymore. Russia had already recruited 180,000 convicts for the war by January 2025, according to the Kyiv Independent, and the cells are starting to run low. Russia has also been trying to recruit as many soldiers as it can from third countries, though that particular wellspring is drier than Putin would want it to be. It certainly doesn't offer Russia anywhere near the number of volunteer soldiers it needs to replace what de Bretton-Gordon says amounts to an estimated 35,000 casualties every single month. So mobilization is Putin's answer to the crisis that this pressure has created. But there has been no grand announcement or patriotic call to arms after 4 years of a grinding war that the Kremlin knows has exhausted Russia's people. The mobilization is being carried out in secret, as Breton Gordon explains. According to well-informed contacts of mine in the intelligence community, Putin now appears to be carrying out mobilization by stealth, he says, adding, "The usual biannual conscription cycles, historically around 130,000 per intake, have been replaced with a rolling draft system, designed to obscure the sheer numbers of men being called up. This stealthy version of mobilization is even bigger than the partial mobilization that Putin ordered back in 2022, Breton Gordon claims. And it typically involves Russia forcing reservists who should be dealing with rear area duties and infrastructure protection onto the front lines. Putin has found a short-term solution for his attritional Ukraine campaign. A way to inject soldiers into a military that has crumbled under his own pressure and Ukraine's devastating defenses. However, to achieve that short-term boost, Putin is sacrificing Russia's future for a war that still won't be won, even as he injects the Russian military with soldiers who shouldn't be on the front lines. Perhaps now it's becoming clearer why the commander's soldiers earlier in the video were refusing to push. They're like Dante and Clerks. They weren't even supposed to be here today. Or any day for that matter. Yet this has been happening for a while. Back in October, the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, reported that the Kremlin was gearing up to push reservists to the front in a rolling mobilization approach that sounds much like what Breton Gordon describes. At the time, the ISW noted that the pay-to-play approach that Russia used for almost 4 years is delivering diminishing returns. Money isn't working for Putin anymore, so he has to take the underhanded route of forcing reservists into the war. As we said, it's a short-term solution. There are only so many reservists that Putin can use. But Russia's big problem now is that Putin's new recruiting strategy, which is all designed to maintain the pressure that is actually killing Russia on the battlefield, is so short-sighted that it stands to destroy Russia. Putin knows this. There's a reason why he's keeping his mobilization tactic a secret. As the Atlantic Council notes, the first round of Russian mobilization, which was only partial and took place way back in September 2022, was already deeply unpopular with the Russian public. Many asked themselves the obvious question of why soldiers would have to be forced to the front lines in a country that Russia was supposed to steamroll. If Putin went public with the mobilization that he's carrying out now, it would be an admission of what many outside of Russia already know, that Russia is collapsing under the pressure that Putin is placing on his military through his antiquated and insufficient strategy. But Putin has to do it. He needs more meat for the grinder. Now, we'd love to tell you that this secret mobilization will be the death of Russia in the sense that the country's people are going to rebel if the news of it ever goes public. As the former head of HUR and now head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, explained in September, the Kremlin is willing to absorb the backlash of a mobilization, and it's unlikely the Russians would outright rebel. When in 2022 they conducted the mobilization, they immediately tried to shut it down because of public backlash. But can that stop Russia? No, it won't stop it, Budanov claimed. Rebellion is unlikely. But what Putin is doing to Russia with mobilization is destroying his own country from the inside just to keep fighting a war that Russia has already lost. The Pandora's box of mobilization has been opened, albeit in secret, and as Ihor Petrenko writes for The Gaze, the stability of the Russian state is now under a fire threat as a result. According to Petrenko, Putin's mobilization destroys the social contract that Russia's president holds with his people. What was supposed to be a distant, special military operation will turn the Ukraine war into a profound crisis for millions of Russian families who have to see their loved ones sent to a front they were never supposed to be on. That's already happening. The Kremlin now faces the impossible task of delivering the victory that Putin promised without paying the price needed to obtain that victory. Support for the war might collapse in Russia if mobilization is made public. But far more dangerous to Russia right now is the impact that Putin's secret desperation tactic is going to have on the country and its economy. Russia has a labor problem, a massive one in fact. Around 1.3 million casualties already amount to at least 2% of Russia's entire workforce, Petrenko explains, which has created shocks in almost any industry that isn't directly linked to Putin's invasion. The war economy that Putin has created is a sign of weakness because it's an insatiable monster that is sucking up every able-bodied man in Russia. If those men aren't on the front, they're working in factories to build weapons and equipment. Every other Russian industry has been damned by this massive drain on human resources, and Russia is feeling the pinch. Right now, Russia's birth rate is 1.4 per woman, which is well below the 2.1 average needed for what Forbes calls the stable replacement of the country's population. In other words, as Putin's pressure kills yet more soldiers in Ukraine, Russia's population is declining at a frightening rate. Combine that with the wartime economy issue we just mentioned, and you get the labor shortage that will kill Russia's economy. Putin is as desperate in this department as he is in terms of finding more manpower for his war. As RBC Ukraine reports, Russia now has a labor gap of 2.3 million people. Not even the traditional sources of labor upon which Russia relies, such as Central Asia, can fill that gap, which has led to Russia to rely on other countries. We're now seeing a sharp increase in recruitment from India. Almost 72,000 Indian citizens obtained Russian work visas in 2025, compared to 5,000 in 2021, which is the year before Putin started his war. The Economic Times adds that Russia is also recruiting from Sri Lanka, all in a futile attempt to fill the labor gap. What all of this means is that a demographic crisis is growing in Russia. As more workers come from overseas, the Russian people who should be taking the jobs that these migrant workers have are dying in Ukraine. Let's say that after years, perhaps even decades of fighting in Ukraine, Russia somehow wins. Millions of its men will be dead, which does nothing to help the birth rate crisis, and those who survived will come back to a version of Russia that is more heavily dependent on foreign labor than ever before. Russia is losing its sense of self as its men die in Ukraine. But still, the pressure will rise. Putin's losing war has imploded, and all that's left is the constant state of chaos into which he has plunged his entire country. Putin tried to do something truly insane when he invaded Ukraine. All he really achieved was exposing how fragile Russia is. As economic strain combined with the desire for separatism and vanishing geopolitical influence, Russia is broken forever. Find out more in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering the collapse of Russia from the inside out. And thank you as always for watching.